Good afternoon, everyone. We're so happy to have you here for the GBH Media Summit today. My name is Alexi Cohan. I'm a digital producer with GBH News. I cover local politics, and I'm the lead producer and moderator of a monthly politics video series featuring Gen Z voters. This session is called Civic Revolution, Fueling the Next Generation. Today, we'll be talking about Gen Z's message for media leaders. They're rejecting traditional business, policy, and media operations and creating content that reflects their own personal experience. Because of this, their fight for democracy takes on a new form. Today's conversation will be moderated by Sophie Beren, founder and CEO of The Conversationalist. Sophie will be joined by Elizabeth Clay Roy, CEO of Generation Citizen, a nonpartisan organization that partners with schools to offer civic education. Next, we will have Kenny Andejeski, strategist with Why Here Matters, a social enterprise that fosters belonging and social cohesion. We are also joined by Lauren Bash, a content creator, climate optimist, and activist. Kay Kawashima Ginsburg, an expert in youth civic engagement and former Newhouse director of Tough Circle. And Martina Guzmán, director of the Race and Justice Reporting Initiative at the Damon J. Keith Center for Civil Rights at Wayne State University Law School. Please give our panelists a warm welcome and thank you all for being here.
Hey. I know it's been a long day, but we hope that this conversation will just keep the momentum going. Alexi, thank you so much for the beautiful introductions. My name is Sophie Beren, and I could not be more excited for this conversation. I'm going to kick off our panel in a non-traditional way because we are talking about Gen Z, and if we can all agree on something, it is that we want to challenge the status quo. And today at GBH, I think a lot of the conversations that we've been having prove that common ground is possible, right? It just takes a little time to dig our heels in and uncover it. So I hope that today we round out this conversation by really giving each of you actionable tools to take back to your work and your communities to not just mobilize young people, but really bring them in to the conversation. And for just a note of context, I run a Gen Z platform called The Conversationalist, and we're on a mission to unify our generation by showing us that coexisting should be something that we want to do, not just something that we have to do. And we run a Gen Z talk show called POVs, where we actually interview young people from all different backgrounds and belief systems. And something that we love to ask on our show is for our guests to drop a hot take. So I'm gonna kick us off by turning to our amazing panelists who are gonna very briefly introduce themselves to you and drop a hot take that connects to our topics today around public media and mobilizing young people. All right, Kay, wanna kick us off?
Oh my gosh, okay. Hi everyone. I'm Kay Kawashima Ginsburg, and I used to lead CIRCLE, which stands for Center for Information on Research on Civic Learning and Engagement at Tufts University, and I'm currently consulting with Tisch College. My hot take would be assuming that the public media can mobilize a large group of people around political movement is a non-starter.
And also something I
Yeah.
So if you hear something that resonates with you and you want to join the conversation, just snap it up.
out.
But Kenny, coming to you next.
Oh gosh, popcorn. Hi everyone, Kenny Andejeski, strategist, facilitator, founder of Why Here Matters, coming to you from Chattanooga, Tennessee. And my hot take is so hot, I don't even know how I feel about it. But I think that public media should help us understand that patriotism isn't political.
Okay, Liz, you're up.
All right. Hey, everybody. Liz Clay Roy, CEO Generation Citizen, coming from New York City. And my hot take is that often when youth is slapped on some media, that makes it cringe.
Yes, not cringe.
Okay. Speaking of social media, Lauren.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Bash. I'm a climate content creator, storyteller, first-time filmmaker, woo! And I live in Los Angeles. And my hot take is that public media should, if public media is serious about being invested in engaging and activating young people, then they should have more young people on camera and in front of the camera, and invest in shows like POVs.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, Martina, coming to you.
Yeah, Martina Guzmán, Director of the Race and Justice Reporting Initiative, coming to you from Detroit. And my hot take is that public media ignores the Latino community.
That was some spice that we needed. Thank you all so much. And I'd love to also add one to the mix. My hot take is that engaging young people when it comes to media is actually not that complicated. And I want to start off by sharing a really brief story. So I mentioned this show that I've started called POVs with a Z for Gen Z. And I was recently filming in Washington Square Park in New York City around the election. And I walked up to a young man who went to school in the area. And I asked him point blank on camera, are you planning on voting in this election? And he almost scoffed in my face. The thought of voting in the election wasn't even on his radar. It was actually something he was intentionally planning not to do. And he felt like he needed to defend that till the cows come home. I'm from Kansas, so you may hear some references. And he felt very passionately that there was no place for him in this presidential election. So we shut off the cameras, and I stepped aside with him afterwards, and I dug into why he felt this way without the pressure of being on camera, and just engaged him in a conversation. And we talked for a good 15, 20 minutes just around his trepidations, his fears, why he felt disenfranchised by a lot of these traditional institutions. And by the end of our conversation, after creating the environment for him to be heard, I was able to share a little bit about my POV and why so many of the things that our generation just often needs are the receipts in seeing that it's possible, right? The changes that we want, we've seen happen from a single vote or in a close race. And after we left that interaction, he gave me a hug and he told me that had we not had that conversation, he would have never stepped into a voting booth, but that he was going to vote after we had that conversation. Wow. And thank you, oh my gosh. And a few months later, I followed up, we maintained the relationship, we follow each other on Instagram, and I reached out right on election day to see if he actually planned on voting, and he said that he went, and to that day, he wouldn't have done that had we not had the conversation. So I wanted to frame this panel by sharing that engaging young people is possible, and sometimes it just boils down to creating the right environment for them to truly feel heard and that their needs matter and that you are actually going to engage them beyond just a 2-second clip on social media or a quick soundbite for a story. So I hope that this is something that we can all learn from today from these incredible panelists who are doing the exact same thing as we are at the Conversationalist. And often for our generation that feels apathetic in these spaces, we sometimes have to create new ones. So I want to turn to our panelists and hear a little bit more about the new spaces that you're creating in the work that you're doing and what we can all learn from to bring that back to our work. So Kay, I'm going to come to you again first. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing to create these spaces for young people to feel a part of the conversation.
Sure, a couple of things. So I just exited an organization that I was running to do research, but more importantly, to share information about how young people become engaged, how they learn about civic life, and connect with others to stay involved. So part of the work was really thinking about how do we actually study young people and live the value of seeing young people as expertise of their own lives. So we, about 5 years ago, as an organization, reflected on what do we mean by that value, youth as an expertise. Sure, we survey them, but we don't actually help, ask them what do we study. We're not actually partnering with young people. So we started doing things like actually partnering with young people in a project to both train young people as researchers, but help them kind of cultivate the questions themselves that they were asking. So we worked with high school students in Minneapolis, for example, who were doing election work. They're poll workers as teenagers, which you can do in 43 states. And they kind of asked their own question about how is it helping us? So they published a paper with us, right, on Tufts University website. More recently, Circle started an advisory board that had about 1/3 of young people who are under the age of 25, including high school student at the time. We did not label that a youth advisory board because they were not separate from these other expertise who are my age group or slightly younger or even older, but they were in it together to solve our shared public problem for us. The question was really, as an organization at a university in a changing society studying civic engagement among young people, what should we do? And that question needed to be answered through intergenerational partnership. So that's part of what I'm doing. I think that's probably enough said. But I want to say one thing about kind of how it's not that hard to engage young people. Circle's research did find that news and information alone doesn't really mobilize action, hence my hot take. However, talking about the news and information with peers enhances their ability to engage from there. So that really resonated with me, your story, Sophie. The other one was really about making content from the news and information and how that makes young people really feel prepared and engaged. So those are really, really resonating with the research that we've done. I hope that helps.
Liz, what about you? Tell us more about the work that you're doing and how it's challenging traditional definitions of civic engagement.
So at Generation Citizen, we bring community-based civics into classrooms across the country through our curriculum, professional development, and coaching for teachers. We believe that young people are not just citizens in waiting. So the idea isn't that they just get civics education poured into them a little bit each year, and then when they turn 18, they're ready to go vote. Young people are community members who have something to contribute now. Civics is about community problem solving, not just about voting. And so our approach with project-based civic learning is to have young people get invested in learning about local and state government primarily because they are seeking to solve a real problem in their communities. So our students from middle schools here, across Massachusetts, to high schools across Oklahoma City. These students are identifying an issue that they want to take on, whether it's access to high quality mental health support or putting a fence around the field where they play football. And when they figure out, okay, if this is the problem that we're seeking to solve, who do we have to get involved? Do we go to the city council? Do we go to the town manager? How much does it cost? Who decides whether we pay for this or that? That is the approach, and the excitement that they have for solving that problem motivates them to become not only engaged and agentic kind of civic actors, but also supports their academic development in really rich and rigorous ways. So we're really seeking to instill civic skills alongside civic knowledge and civic motivation in middle and high schools across the country.
Love that. Yeah, so much of it is just getting them feeling like these are the issues in their own backyard that they can be a part of solving.
That's right.
And Lauren, I know the content that you create really reaches young people where they are. Tell us more about how you're challenging these traditional narratives in the content you're creating.
Yeah. So the majority of my work is on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and it's all short form, like sub 45 seconds, which is wild. But it works, and I know that there are a lot of complications with young people using social media, and I don't want to negate that. I understand that there are harms on young people's mental health development in using social media, and I fully acknowledge that. And when something like the LA fires happens, and there's so much misinformation going on, but it radicalizes a lot of people, especially a lot of young people, saying, my backyard is on fire, my school burned down, my home burned down, and my friend's home burned down, and I want to do something. And this is when social media can be such a powerful tool for engagement. And so, quick story, I had made a video. I'm from LA, I have a lot of pride being from LA, and I was outraged. Our AQI was at like 500 one day because the smoke was so bad. And so I put a respirator mask on, and I had gone to the top of a hill where you could see both the Palisades fire and the Pasadena fires. And smoke was so bad. And I was telling Ken, the video was inspired by the film Love Actually, when he's like confessing his love to Keira Knightley with the signs. And I just watched it because it was the holidays prior, but I wrote, I was like, big oil knows what they've done, like big oil is to be held responsible. It's not fair or just that California taxpayers will have to pay to rebuild, hold polluters accountable. And there's an amazing organization called Make Polluters Pay, and they're working on the legislation for the Climate Superfund bill that passed in Vermont, New York, and will pass in California. And so it was a call for an action alert saying, let's hold these suckers accountable, and you can join us by signing your name. And this video went insane, and it led to 56,000 people signing this petition, and 80% of my audience are young people. And so we can show that this works too, that this is how we can help mobilize people who might feel overwhelmed or withdrawn, or even like what you said, maybe apathetic at times too. Like, what can I do? Our leaders are failing us. But if a video can be powerful enough, perhaps it can help them take action.
Love that. Martina, tell us more about your work, and in this conversation around bringing young people to the table, how are you challenging what has been done in the past?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say something, though, to your point about, what happened was that this was an issue that was personal to them, right? So this is what brought them in. I was a reporter during the presidential election, and I went into the Arab community to go to the voting locations, and there were 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds who were telling me it's my first time voting and I'm so proud, because it was about an issue that was personal to them. They were being reached directly, and they were being pulled into the media because of those issues. And how you bring people in, or how we brought people in Detroit is, as I said earlier, the Latino community is ignored, and we feel that, and we have a lot of resentment about that. We are not covered comprehensively. We are, when it comes to voting, it's like, oh, we're the sleeping giant. We can determine elections. We can, all of these stories, right? But when it comes to comprehensive coverage, there's nothing. It's abysmal. Not even our cultural contributions, right, are there. We are more than Bad Bunny, kind of thing. And so, what I did was, there was a small fledgling newspaper in Detroit. It was a community newspaper. It's called El Central. And the new owner reached out to me, and the original owner was retiring. And he said, I know that you're one of like 3 Latino journalists in Detroit. Do you have any advice for me? So I was really gung-ho, and I went over there, and I said, I'm really excited about this and about you taking over. And what we did was, and I said, who are your reporters? And he was like, I don't have any. I was like, right? And I was like, oh my God. But I said, I can help you. I had been working with freelance journalists for 4 years. And I did a call out to all the freelance journalists. And I was like, El Central needs freelance writers. And what we did was we literally built a newsroom out of freelance reporters, right? And we put a call out to the community, to the Latino community. And everyone who said that they wanted to write for El Central, they were all in their 20s. And at first I was like, wow, I wasn't sure how to manage this group, because the stories they were telling me wasn't necessarily what, again, it was like this switching of a mindset, what I would want to hear on NPR, for example. But once I got clear, what they were telling me were that there was all these underground movements that I knew nothing about. There was one of the girls said, one of the young reporters said, there's a house on Chamberlain Street, and once a month they have these punk rock parties. It's called Voodoo House. And I was like, wait a minute, Latino punk rockers in a house called Voodoo? And she's like, yeah. And I said, how do you know? She's like, because I went. And I was like, that's a great story. Go report on it. Yeah. There was another one where they were like having these kind of underground fashion shows, right? The fashion was horrible, but they were having them regularly, and they were putting it on Instagram and on social media. And I was like, go do a story on this. Like, this is interesting just because they're doing it. But that story went gangbusters, right? Because they wanted to see themselves. They wanted to see their fashion. They wanted to see themselves in the newspaper. And all of a sudden, El Central became the newspaper to go to within a year and a half about a year and a half. Became the newspaper to go to for anything Latino information. We were covering food, we were covering pop culture, we were covering everything. And to the degree that what happened was that all of the big media, right, because Detroit is media healthy, I mean, we have a lot of media outlets, all of a sudden they started picking up these stories. Picking up the stories that and I'd made a list every time that we did a story first, and then it got picked up. I was like, oh, I'm gonna write that down. So, and I had a long list of stories that were being picked up, about what was happening in the Latino community. But it was because I was working with young people. I was ready to mentor them, which was another really important thing that we decided, the owner of the newspaper and I, that this was going to be a teaching newspaper, right? That with this community newspaper, I was an editor. I had the capabilities of teaching, and I was going to work with them to get the best stories, to teach them how to create a lead, to teach them, in many cases, some knew, some didn't, how to create a nut graph, how to really get like first and secondary sources. And I worked with them, and we had a ball. We would get on weekly editorial meetings. Most of them had full-time jobs, but they wanted to contribute on a regular basis. And it has been incredible. And I'll say one last thing. I feel like this room should be packed, should be full, right? And the reason is because young people, these are your future patrons. These are the future news leaders. These are the future people that are going to buy subscriptions to your media outlets. And I'm always, again, like with the Latino community, if there's something like, oh, Latinos in the news, it's like empty, right? And you can tell we have still problems that we need to conquer, but there are a lot of glimmers of hope.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martina. And also thank you to all of you for being in the room and being a part of this conversation.
Yes.
Kenny, coming to you, what do you think we would be surprised to learn about the work you do?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I guess I'll give some pretext about why Here Matters. It's something that started as a concept for me in 2019. I was traveling all over the country, engaging people in their local communities throughout Middle America, especially as someone who grew up in the Midwest, and really wanted to hone in on why these communities mattered to the people trying to create change in them. So it was focused on community and narrative and storytelling and narrative change ultimately. And I ended up spending a lot of time in Appalachia in the South and engaging with a lot of local community leaders that really wanted to create change in their community, but were working against such a strong status quo that they felt like they had to be martyrs in order to do it. It was them against the world. They didn't have the network, the resources, the narrative that they were working against in the region of the country was really negating a lot of the positive community building work they were doing. And this was age agnostic for the purpose of our conversation. But then coming out of the pandemic, I ended up in this unique position where the concept could become a company. And this was me transitioning from a 20-something with a lot of dreams and ambitions to a 30-something that's like, I gotta figure out what I'm doing in this world that will make me money and help me live a stable life. And what's interesting with the nature of my work at this point is for the last 4 years, I've been able to work at the national, regional, and local scale in building community and increasing engagement and shifting narratives for the folks that I do work with. On the national scale, it's actually working with national leaders like Liz through New Pluralists, which is a funder collaborative that's been a client of mine, and figuring out how national leaders can effectively collaborate with each other and engage with funders and communicate and share best learnings. But what was really interesting about being in those spaces for the last 4 years is I've been the youngest person in them and have been tokenized as the youngest person. And then there's been that kind of little brother nature of me as the group facilitator. And so there's that turning point for me of where are the spaces that I can go as someone who participated in a lot of fellowships in my 20s. I did AmeriCorps right out of college and then did a bunch of urban revitalization or justice, equity, diversity, inclusion-oriented retreats and summits that helped me develop this professional background that has allowed me to be successful. But my work focuses also on the regional scale in Appalachia and the Southeast, where I work with nonprofit clients that have a grant or an initiative where they're trying to engage young adults and figure out how the challenges and opportunities that are faced in more rural or rural adjacent communities or in Appalachia or the Southeast differ from the narratives and the bodies of research that we have coming out of, frankly, like geographies like Boston. And then finally, in a place like Chattanooga, which just recently became America's first national park city, whatever that means. It is wonderful. It's going to be something that creates a lot of cause for engagement and really celebrates a lot of our natural resources and tendencies for engagement. It's also the friendliest city. It also has a long history of encouraging people to become a part of community. And I love it as a space where we get to explore the different ways that people can engage. And the one thing I'll say that really loops back to your question, Sophie, is I feel really strongly at this point that we should be looking at community organizing or community engagement just for the sake of doing it, for building out these tendencies and this capacity and these relationships for people to know each other and be connected, rather than towards explicitly activist or progressive or change-oriented causes. Because when we come to the table to discuss something that isn't shared between two people, it often leads to those spirals that a lot of the panels have spoken to today.
Absolutely. Liz, I know a lot of your work taps into this notion of community-driven civics. And I actually have a question for both you and Kay. I know, Liz, you're the first to say that you don't see youth engagement and civic health as separate. They have to be interdependent and work together. And Kay, I know that you're also the first to say that media and information also serve far greater purposes than just to disseminate information. So I want to know from the two of you, what can we in the room all be doing more of to turn young people into powerful contributors to our democracy, especially right now with the current administration and in a time where a lot of young people, again, don't feel like this democracy is for them? How can we turn young people into contributors, and how does that play into your work with community-driven civics?
Sure. Well, your story made me think about the importance of building trust with each other and not being transactional. And I think one of the challenges, and I get frustrated with this every 4 years, is there will be this obsession with the young voter and what will the young voter do, and then people start getting all of this, all of these questions and all of the text messages, both asking for money and asking for time, and I think that turns off a lot of people of all ages, where they feel like they are being, someone wants to extract something from them. And when we treat civic engagement as another way of doing horse race politics, which sometimes the media can do, sometimes organizations do, that I think turns a lot of people off. It's really, for the young people who we have a chance to work with, the students we have a chance to work with, what we observe is when the entry point into civic engagement is around what matters to you. Right? And often what matters is something that's gone on in their life, or even more often, the life of a friend. Right? I love that working with adolescents invites them to lean into one of the most special things about adolescence, which is the deep care for their peers and their peer networks. And so when we build on the opportunity with young people and with everyone to go first to the issues that we want to solve, the things that we care about in our communities, either because we want to make them better and fix them, or because we love them and want to preserve them, that is the right entry point for deep and lasting community engagement, rather than the transactional approach of thinking about someone just as a voter, just as a donor, or even just as a one-time volunteer.
Kay, what about you?
So great, so little to add. But I think another way to frame what Liz is saying about transaction is short-term interest versus a long-term investment. So the reason why this room is emptier maybe than the other room, right? It's the other one is kind of talking about the current competition with social media content, is that it takes time to build a community, and especially to build a generation that really enjoys rigorous fact-checking, appreciates understanding issues deeply, and deliberating across differences. It does start in classroom. It's a really great place to do it, as well as family or community setting like Kenny's leading, to make sure that the young people not only have opportunity to get an information from media organizations, but have an opportunity to really think about what that means to them. Part of that is done through reflecting diverse communities through the media and the stories that are coming from grassroots. But the other one is also really embedding opportunities for people to think a little bit more, so that they can sustain judgment and contempt for what they're seeing and hearing from perhaps people that they disagree with, but still able to engage in it. So when I think even about the civic education in K-12 classrooms, I think about, and I know Generation Citizen does this, building community first. Before you start to deliberate on which issue you're gonna work on, which approach you're gonna take, what are we actually advocating for, because if we can get people to disagree productively from early on, we are not going to be able to sustain democracy. That's what civic life is. It's so messy. It's full of disagreement. We fail all the time, right? But if we kind of present to young people, this is what this civic life looks like through just experts and politicians and adults, and never showing young people from diverse communities holding the different ideologies and belief systems, young people are going to see that barrier for entry. One of the major reasons that people name, especially young people, for not engaging in civic life is not lack of knowledge, it's actually anxiety about unknown. We have to remember the Generation Z is struggling a lot with anxiety and depression, more than before. And one of the things that they name a lot, and we were even talking about workplace culture with some of my friends here, is the anxiety around doing the right thing, having the right answer, right? And civic engagement can be that barrier. So having shows where young people talk about their everyday issues and showing their struggle, their kind of real life story, how much fun they have and how much fun they don't have is really important. So I really push for collaboration with different kind of stakeholders, whether it's the social media content creators or educators.
Thanks, Kay. And I want to talk more about what you just mentioned about how right now young people need to have spaces to think. And I think a lot of the platforms, especially if we're talking about social media, don't really create the environment for that sort of dialogue to happen. I know Kenny, Lauren, the three of us especially feel that this harmful, conflict-driven media doesn't actually allow for solutions to come forward. And I actually want to share that I've had the honor of having Lauren on our show. And I asked her in the microphone, what is something keeping you up at night? Do you remember what you said?
I think it was something about like plant-based, like meat bros on the internet.
Absolutely. Lauren said something that haunts her is the amount of meat that Americans eat and the amount of resources that go into funding the ability for animals to produce that food for humans. And I did something a little untraditional, non-traditional, and I asked her to then, after sharing her fiery perspective, to try arguing it from the other perspective. And she so beautifully and eloquently said that she has empathy for the fact that things have always been done a certain way, and for a lot of people, they don't know anything else. And it's important for there to be a sharing of information and a conversation to consider that other perspective. And I want to know from the two of you especially, how can we create more environments for these conversations to happen? And Lauren, maybe start with you. For the journalists and the media leaders in the room, how can we utilize these platforms to build communities like yours, but actually create the right environment for these conversations to happen?
Kenny and I were talking about this earlier. I feel like social media is such a beautiful thing because folks who feel like they don't have IRL, in real life community, can turn to it to build community. So we were talking about maybe queer kids in rural areas feel like I don't have a sense of belonging in my physical community, but I can go online and I feel represented and nurtured and seen and excited, you know. And a lot of folks have showed up in my DMs or comment section saying, I can't talk about climate change at the dinner table because my dad is a Trumper and my teachers are denying it. And so I feel like I get to go to this place where we're talking about these things in a very normal way, and I feel safe here. And so an activity I was telling Ken too, an activity I was doing the beginning of last year was I did like a social listening project where I literally put my calendar on my Instagram stories and I was like, hey, book 15 minutes with me. I just want to hear I want to see who you are because you see in my life, but let me see into yours. And so I chatted with 30 different people. They were all women, young women. And I just asked them, like, what does climate activism look like in your community? Are you plugged in? What does it look like in your day-to-day life? And a lot of them were like sustainability queens. You know, they thrifted, they like participated in Meatless Mondays, or were cooking plant-based for their families, or they like got their whole college dorm secondhand or whatever. And they're participating in sustainable living day to day. And they said, but the toughest thing I struggle with is how do I talk to my family about this? So like, I might be in college or out of college, but I'm dreading going home for the holidays because I don't know how to talk to my family about this anymore. And so I started this skit series where you've seen them online. It's like, it's me talking to me. And it's me as a climate activist talking to a family member. And it was like how to talk to your family about climate change over the holidays. And it was post-election. And so we knew that, you know, dinner tables were going to be tense during the holidays. And part of it, I had to ask people, like, truly, what are these conversations that you're having with your family, and what is the fear? But yeah, I tried to essentially like implement nonviolent communication tactics in these conversations, and always with a call to action at the end of like, could we watch a documentary together at the end? Or could we prepare a plant-based meal together at the end? Or like, I understand that you love RFK because you think that now we're not going to have toxins in our food, but can I tell you about where toxins come from? And like, can we talk about oil and gas? Because we actually want the same things. And so that was, I guess, my contribution to young people in nurturing them through these really tough conversations, you know? Awesome. Yeah, that was a fun one to work on.
Thanks for sharing that. And Kenny, in the work that you're doing, how can we in the room learn from what you're doing to hopefully create more unifying narratives rather than divisive ones?
Yeah, I'm finding the challenge of trying to articulate my thoughts while listening to such great contributions on this panel, so I'll try to keep everything organized. But a few points or a few things I want to thread in. Liz, with your point around every 4 years, and to emphasize that the last point I just made around like really pulling apart political engagement and civic engagement. And for me, this was going to be my hot take, but it's more of a broad one around, I think voting is actually like 5% of civic engagement.
That's good.
Like, show up to the polls, do your hygienic process of participating in democracy, and then like go volunteer, go pick up trash, go be a member of a church, go like just be Dungeons and Dragons of civic engagement, Comic-Con, Ultimate Frisbee, creating the Run Club that helped organize a resource list of families that were affected by the forest fire, or sorry, not the LA fires. But all those spaces are civic spaces that if we build them right and we have a certain cohesion and community, when there is crisis, you know, I was actually house sitting in Cambridge when the pandemic set in. And I was engaged in all of the mutual aid work that spun up. And it was amazing to see that level of coordination in crisis. And I'm sure many of the people in this room got to see those spreadsheets. And I managed some of the donations for the Cambridge Mutual Aid Network, and that was in crisis. And the sustainability of those initiatives outside of crisis is, you know, a real question. Like mutual aid is a conversation, but is it a practice when we don't necessarily need it? So I think that is really important. And then Kay, you had an insight that I can't quite remember. But the other thing I would say is I think in the work I do in Chattanooga and Appalachia, there's definitely a heterodoxy of beliefs and values. It's a really difficult political environment. It's very disempowering. There isn't really many ways or resources to get involved effectively. So overcoming that barrier of proving to people that their voice and their action and their participation is worth it is where the majority of the attention and resources go. So I think marrying that to the fact of just creating spaces for belonging and connection, a good example that I would offer is when Roe v. Wade was overturned. I had an ultimate frisbee tournament that weekend with my mixed gender ultimate frisbee team, and we had pro-life and pro-choice women, if we use those framings, on the team. And there was a moment where they ended up engaged in that conversation with each other. And I had to intervene and be like, we're team and friends and community first. We can't solve this problem ourselves. So how do we center that in the way that we're talking about this? And I just think models like that. And the final thing I'll say is I'd be remiss if I didn't do this, because I'm used to being in spaces and stages where I'm the only male over the last 10 years. And the only challenge that I'll offer to everyone here is how do we get more young men to participate in public life?
Good.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you for adding that perspective. And Martina, I know throughout your career, you have fearlessly and tirelessly advocated for fellow journalists of color. And there's even more of a need now, not only just to uplift young voices, but particularly young voices of color. And I want to know, for us in the room, when we think about engaging young people, so often we talk about Gen Z or even now Gen Alpha as such a monolith. And I want to know from your expertise, how can we overcome some of these barriers and mobilize an entire generation that completely looks, thinks, and acts and votes differently as individuals?
You mean in general or journalists?
Maybe for the people in the room, speaking in the context of mobilizing younger audiences and viewers.
I think that paying attention to communities of color, whatever city you live in, and reporting on them comprehensively is a very direct way in which to connect with an audience. You know, the minute they see themselves reflected into something, then they're hooked in a way. I'll give you sort of a bad example, and then I'll give you a good example. There was a story that came out a few years ago in the Latino community. It was a food story. It was by a big newspaper, and they did this story about like where to get really good tamales. And it was, you know, people were sharing it on social media, and I was furious because I was like, this story, if this is your attempt to report on us, this is a really bad attempt, because we already know where to get the good tamales. and this story is it's like tourism reporting, right? So people they're not going to connect with this story. And so connecting with them so that they're engaged and they're informed into what they do. And I speak of news because that's the nature of the world I live in. And the more you connect with these communities, the more they're going to participate. We have two systems of news in this country. We have traditional media, we follow ethics, we follow standards, we have rules, and we have an incredibly strong propaganda arm. They are no longer fringe. This is an established way of getting news now. And this is the battle that we're up against. And so the way that I know how to connect with people is to be very comprehensive and to be authentic with them. And whether I'm going into a community of color that I've never been to before, like show up humbly and respectfully to build those relationships. And all the journalists of color that I work with, we do the same thing. And I advocate for them to do the same thing, to walk into these communities. This is long-term work. This is not something that it's like a quick initiative. These are 10-year periods of like building these relationships. And recently I found out that there was a couple of groups in the city of Detroit that had a list of newspapers that they considered safe, right? And so the work that I was doing was on that list, and I felt incredibly proud of that, which means that that community was now connecting with the kind of news that we were doing, about that community. So if you're not connecting with them, if you're not connecting with young people, if you're not connecting with communities of color, then don't ask when it comes to voting time, why those people are not engaged. Don't ask why they voted the way they voted. Don't ask, all of these questions that later on we're like dumbfounded about. If you're not talking to them and getting news to them and reaching out in the way that we as news people know how to do, and then you have all of these, books being written later about, why they voted the way they voted, because you're not appealing to them. Meanwhile, in that vacuum, that other system of news that I was talking to is speaking directly to them. And so we're in a sort of existential battle, not just for youth, but for communities of color. And I will say one last thing. I was on a panel earlier that was talking about the distrust with media. Long before all these articles about sort of like, white America not trusting media, Black people, I come from a city that's 85% Black, Black people had not been trusting media for decades. So it wasn't a big jump to begin to see Latinos and Black people voting in a way that sort of astonishes people. If they don't trust you and they don't trust these institutions, and the erosion of the trust in civic and democratic institutions begins to happen, then you start losing people really quickly. So when you talk about voting and motivating people, how do we get this civic participation? For me, reporting on them comprehensively is always the way.
Last week, the Harvard Institute of Politics released its latest youth poll. And the stat that I wanted to share with all of you is that only 15% of young Americans right now feel that our country is headed in the right direction. Show of hands, does that surprise you? Not a single hand was just raised. And I hope that as we round out our conversation today, we acknowledge that hopefully that stat shouldn't just sit with us in the room and stop here, but rather present itself as an opportunity. There are so many ways each of us can take small actions to engage and mobilize young people every single day, and it's not that complicated. And I think one of the best places to start is by acknowledging that problems exist. I think so often in media, we're skirting around the issues when a lot of young people just want to feel seen and understood. So as we leave our conversation today, I hope that we can use this as leverage to acknowledge that this is a problem worth solving. And each of you being in the room today is proof that it matters and you did the thing. So as we leave, I just want our panelists to, in 10 seconds or less, oh, but there's time for Q&A. Amazing. Okay, so before we turn to you, I just want to really briefly ask our panelists, we started with the problem, right? And I just said it's important to acknowledge the problem exists. We all shared a hot take. But if you can just quickly share one thing that on the flip side is giving you hope, and how can everyone in the room get involved in the work that you're doing? Martina, start with you.
So I was reporting intensely in the Latino community and discovered that Russians were buying airtime on Spanish language radio stations. And as a result, we invented a tool called Bredar that monitors Spanish language radio stations for disinformation and conspiracy theories.
It's beautiful. And how can we get involved in the work you're doing?
Go to Bredar, VERDAD.app and sign up, and you can see what's happening in all the battleground states on Latino, Haitian, and Arabic radio stations.
Okay, so it actually goes with what Martina and Kenny were sort of naming as examples. So young people don't look like they're gathering around national media or in public square so much, but they are cultivating these new spaces, whether it's meeting with Lauren or on Dungeons and Dragons. I witnessed one really recently, a couple of days ago actually, or bike club. Right? So it may not look like the civic life you knew as a child or young person, maybe still young, but I think reporting on those and highlighting the value of that as civic life and not kind of downplaying that as kids just gathering together to get together, I think does have value. So you reporting and seeing those communities, I think, can help.
One of the organizations I volunteer a lot of my time with is called the Surfrider Foundation. They're an ocean conservation org, and they have 150 chapters around the country. And 60 of them are on college campuses. And something I love that Surfrider does is like set very mild guardrails and just lets these kids run. And we had our big California summit a couple months ago, and they, from Pepperdine, from UCLA, from USC, got up and presented what they're doing. And they're doing incredible stuff. And it's because they've had space to be free and go for it. Like they're lobbying at City Hall, they're lobbying in Sacramento, we're going to DC next week, and it's so cool to see, it's so cool to witness. And something I had heard a young person say at a conference last year was, everyone talks about empowering the youth, but it's a young person saying this, but the youth are empowered, the old people just need to step aside. And I was like, that's it. So I think they've got it, y'all. We just need to shut up.
I'll rapid fire a few things. One, I think digital community is real community for younger generations. It goes down in the Discord. The Discord servers are real places. Now, also for local independent news media and information organizations, a lot of them are youth-led. And in the spirit of collaboration, not competition, please celebrate them. And the final thought, well, if you want to get further engaged with me and my work, it's whyherematters.com. And I had one more thought, but Liz.
One thing I would say is seek sources across generations. If all of the sources on an issue that you are telling a deep story about come from those who are 40 or older, you're missing half the story. We bring young people together at the end of the semester who have really gone deep on participatory action research and have a vision for how big problems can be solved. And we celebrate those at Civics Days across the country. There are tons of Civics Days happening in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and in this area in the month of May and June. And so if anyone is interested in participating, covering, engaging with one of those Civics Days, come up to me afterwards or my colleagues, Kara, Juanita, and Adam, who are here, and we can get you connected to one of those Civics Days. But they're from here all the way across to California and many places in between. You can find more about us at generationscitizen.org or on social media.
Beautiful.
Sophie, I got it. In the spirit of co-generation, if you're not familiar with an organization called Co-Generate, the next time you're going to do something and you can bring someone with you, invite someone who's from a different generation. Create co-generational outcomes in all of the spaces that you're hanging out in, and a lot of this stuff will be easy to realize.
I love that. And something giving me hope is actually one of my team members who's in the room with us right now. I'm going to put her on the spot, but Bella, who's sitting here in the front, just had her last class of undergrad today, and we were asking her about really what her passions are and what she wants to do as the next step of her career, and she really wants to run for office here in Boston. And I feel so lucky. She's been working with us at the Conversationalist for the last 4 years, and that is what gives me hope. She's doing incredible things, and the more we can, again, pass the mic to young people who are going out into their communities to make things happen is hopefully what we can all be doing more of. So find us at The Conversationalist on social media or our website, and we'll love to hear your thoughts on our content. But we're going to turn to you with whatever time we have left if you have any questions for us, and continue the conversation with us afterwards as well.
What gives me hope? How about this panel? You know, I'm an old dog with a young soul, and I see so much promise in what you're talking about. And Kenny, I'm the president of WTCI in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we will be working together.
Oh, yes.
Love that.
That was not planned.
Hi, Lauren. I think you mentioned the damage that social media can do to especially its youngest users. Social media platforms know this. They've done internal studies, but they are so driven by the need to make profit that is going to be the ultimate deciding factor in how they create these spaces for all of us to use. So I have been trying to figure out how to phrase this question, and I don't think I got it quite right, but I'm hoping some of you can interpret this and maybe feed this back to us. How do we create those spaces? How do we, where do we go to find the next generation in a place that we can all kind of come together and actually have a conversation that's not governed by Mark Zuckerberg's or I forget who's running YouTube these days, but these algorithms that we have no say over and no insight into. Where can we go where we get a little bit freer from that?
You mean from like a public media perspective? How do you access young people without these platforms?
I guess so. I have been working as a journalist for 20 years, particularly for journalists. Is there a way to reach people? Are there other communities or other spaces that we can go to? Do we need to create those spaces as news media? Is there more that we can be doing, we as an industry can be doing to invite people into conversation and guide some of what we do as one idea, as one thought?
I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is post-fires and post-inauguration. I feel like I even shifted my focus in communication and content creation and was like, okay, I'm gonna talk about LA and California and what's working here, because clearly from a federal perspective, it's looking dark, and I don't want to contribute to the climate doomerism because cuts are happening right and left, but what's happening on the ground in LA and in California is actually really beautiful, and you're seeing people mobilize and activate, and the lever is actually moving, and you're saying, wow, these are huge pieces of policy or legislation that can make a significant impact, and a lot of that's happening in real life. This is community gathering in real life, or fine, community organizers that use Zoom, but it's hyper local. And so I guess that would be my recommendation, or from my own experience, is it hasn't been to the masses where I'm seeing these conversations happen. It's through what we were talking about. It's through Surfrider Foundation LA, or my run club, or the people I surf with, or the people I volunteer at my community garden with. And it's happening in a much more grassroots way, if that makes sense. And which is multi-generational,
Another piece I would add is recognizing that schools, whether those are high schools, community colleges, public colleges, that have their in real life campuses that students are in, are still places where young people are gathering and gathering around issues that matter to them. And so having those be places where journalists are, and not only when there are international protests, but in fact, where there are the chance where young people are talking about the issues in their community that in fact get them agitated. Those are things that they might not feel comfortable. They might not, create a press release and send it to anybody, but they also might not feel like if they reach out to a journalist on social media that they'll ever hear back. And so making those spaces, recognizing those as very much a part of the community, the journalist can spend time, and is something I would encourage too.
I would say, well, a question that rose for me in being here today is, this is a beautiful space that GBH has. How do public groups access it? Can you book time here? Can you use this theater? How do you bring people into this space and expose them to the wonderful media? Last week, I was at PBS of Appalachia, Virginia, in Southwest Virginia, and it's hosted in the Hard Rock Casino. They just opened up their studio a month ago, and they have a glass facade where you can watch them produce content as you're going up and down the escalator from the food hall to the non-smoking casino. Like, that is meeting people where they're at. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. We're done. Okay, well, thank you all so much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. And the last thing that I want to leave you with is that when we think about how we're going to engage young people as we leave the room, always ask yourself, how will we ever change young people's minds if we can't understand them first? So thank you all so much. Please continue the conversation with us. Thank you to GBH and to each of our beautiful panelists for being with us today.